Good evening. My name is David Cohen, and I am the proud president of Five Towns College, located in the town of Huntington, here in Suffolk County. It is my honor to welcome you to this Meet the Candidates event sponsored by the League of Women Voters. This event is made possible not just by the League, but by the students and faculty of the Mass Communication Department here at Five Towns College. From production to streaming and everything in between, these future broadcasters are using all of the knowledge, skills, and competencies that they are learning in class to make this event possible. Five Towns College is a comprehensive institution of higher education, which focuses on media and the performing arts. The college offers accredited undergraduate and graduate degree programs on a beautiful residential campus. The college's small size and small classes make it the right size for most students to pursue their dreams. You can learn more about Five Towns College. Visit us on the web at ftc.edu. That's ftc.edu. And now it is my privilege to welcome the candidates to Five Towns College. I know that they have all prepared for this event and are anxious to share their thoughts with you. I hope you will pay close attention, and when we're done, that you will be a more informed voter at the end. Thank you for spending time with us this evening, and welcome again to virtual Five Towns College.
Hello, my name is Emily Granados, and thank you for joining us for the 2020 Meet the Candidates Night. Today, I'm with the president of the League of Women Voters of Huntington, Lisbeth Thalheimer. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, tell me, what is it like to be a part of the League of Women Voters of Huntington, and what exactly do the League of Women Voters do? Well,
the League of Women Voters has been around for 100 years, just before women fought and won the right for the vote. Our ancestors are the suffragists. We feel very strongly about that and are very proud of our history. We are really all about education. We educate people to vote, how to go about it. We are constantly reaching out to everyone, putting out flyers, the voting dates, the locations, the times. There's a lot of changes this year due to COVID. Now voting by mail, it used to be that we had to have a reason for an absentee ballot. Governor Cuomo changed that due to COVID. We can use the excuse of there's no, temporary illness, so we can vote by mail. It really is all about education, all about the vote, not just for president, although of course this year, that is, what everybody's talking about, what everybody's focused on. But in many ways, your local elections affect your life a lot more. Who you're voting for in your town or village is affecting, maybe if your streets get paved or, trees get cut down. It really, from the top down, it's so important to vote. It's our voice. It's the way we speak.
It truly is. Now, what advice would you have for, young voters who maybe think that, well, I'm one in a million of people, like, why does my vote make a difference?
Every vote counts. I know it's a platitude and everybody says it, but it's the truth. And if nothing else, the last election was super close. The last presidential election was super close. Every vote counted. Don't give your voice away. And it's your future. Young people more important than anybody. It is your future. It is going to be your taxes. It is going to be how you live. It's so important. And it's our civic duty. My family came from Cuba. They lost all their rights to vote. They woke up one day and were not able to vote any longer. It is really so important to me. And as it should be important to everybody. Really and if you're not aware, if you're not familiar with the candidates, go do some research. Go on their websites. If you're distrusting of some media, go on each candidate's website, see what their stances are on issues, and who you agree with. You're not going to agree with everybody on everything, but you'll get a good sense of them and where you fall in that, and vote for that person. If you do nothing else, go vote.
Completely. And if somebody's voting for the first time and wants some good information, what are some resources that they can go and look for?
You can go on vote411.org. You can go on governmentnewyork.org. Both excellent sites to get all the information you need. You can get an absentee ballot. You can get all the information. Vote411.org is a great site. It's actually the League of Women Voters site. You can put in your address if you're not sure of who is running in your district. Find out who's running. You can get all the information there, and then do all the research that you want to do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Elizabeth. And remember, everybody, to stay tuned for more coverage of the 2020 Meet the Candidates Night. I'm Emily Granados, reporting from home.
Thank you, Emily.
Hello, my name's Emily
Hi,
Granados.
my name is Dr. Eve Krief, and I'm the Legislative Chair of New York's Chapter 2, American Academy of Pediatrics. The American Academy of Pediatrics represents the 67,000 pediatricians across the country, and our chapter represents the 1,500 pediatricians across Long Island, Queens, and Brooklyn. The American Academy of Pediatrics is a nonpartisan organization that helps support the education of pediatricians to provide quality health care to children. It also supports and advocates for policies that advance the health and well-being of all children. Kids can't vote, but we can. So many of the policies that impact the health and well-being of children are determined by how we vote. That's why our chapter is so pleased to once again be partnering with the League of Women Voters of Huntington to host today's event that will focus exclusively on issues pertaining to children's health. On behalf of our chapter, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for their partnership. I'd like to thank all the pediatricians that submitted questions to the League for review. And I'd like to extend our thanks to Senator Gorin and Councilman Smith for participating in today's event. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lisa Scott, the moderator of this debate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krief. And welcome everyone to the first, welcome to the League of Women Voters of Huntington's emphasis on children's health debate between the candidates for the 5th Senatorial District for New York State. Both candidates have agreed on the rules and signed off on them. We have a 1-minute opening statement. We have a 90-second limit for each response. The questions will be alternating, starting with each candidate. And each candidate is allowed to ask for a rebuttal time of 1 minute 3 times. And they'll just have to signal, and I'll do that. And finally, we have a 1-minute closing statement at the end. So, gentlemen, Mr. Gorin, you drew lots, and you'll be going first for your opening statement. That's 1 minute.
Well, thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the League once again and the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as our friends at Five Towns College who are producing this. And it's good to see everybody. And Ed, it's good to see you again in another one of our Meet the Candidates. I'm very proud of my record in the State Senate over the last 2 years, and particularly when it comes to the issue of protecting our children and protecting our children's health. Certainly, it starts with record funding for the school districts in my district. I think something that's also significant is finally passing the Child Victims Act so that the people who are now adults will have the opportunity to see justice if they were abused when they were children. And the real purpose of that is also to make sure that we're protecting our children of today. And there are many issues that we have dealt with as it relates to healthcare. Moving forward, we have to deal with the COVID crisis. I'm very concerned about keeping our children safe. We've had, the issue with the schools. Each school district has to come up with and has come up with its own plan and is working very hard to implement it. but we have to keep our children safe as we get through this crisis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warren. Mr. Smith, 1 minute for your opening statement.
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and the American Academy of Pediatrics. My name is Edmund Smith. I'm running because I think New York is heading in the wrong direction. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. My wife, Coriander, and I both grew up in Huntington. We chose to raise our 4 children here. I'm currently a practicing attorney. I'm a town councilman in Huntington. I'm a former Marine Staff Sergeant. I'll work with anyone who shares my concerns, regardless of political party. I'm concerned about my children's future on Long Island. I'm concerned about the high cost of living, the high taxes, most importantly, the lack of new industry. I'm always concerned about their safety. I think the bail system needed reform for truly low-level, nonviolent crimes, but low-level crimes were a Trojan horse that carried in far more serious crimes into the bail reform bill. I will work on true bail reform. I would support anything that's going to safely reopen our economy. It is now the essential role of our government to do so. I will work to attract new businesses to Long Island. If anyone wonders why families are leaving New York and our kids go off to college and don't return, look no further than the Amazon headquarters fiasco for an example.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Our timer, Stephanie Quarles, is holding up 1/2 minute, 15 seconds, and done as signals. And we do ask both candidates to please finish your sentence, finish your thought, but please don't continue in a new vein in any way. Also, I just wanted to mention again, particularly for the people who are watching this debate, the League is all about voter education and civility. And it's really, really important that, particularly tonight, when we're covering questions that were submitted by pediatricians with a huge focus on the young clientele they deal with and represent and are involved with all the time. So although all candidates will, of course, bring in their positions on other things and want to make points in a legitimate way during the debate, we do ask that the substantive part of each of the answers, please come to the question and give us your answer to that question. And that statement is on behalf of the League for all candidates that we deal with. This is not a commentary in any way on one or both of the candidates tonight. That's just a general statement. So this debate in particular is not wide-ranging the way most League debates are, covering a huge variety of questions. As we go through them, you'll see these are really substantive ones. And there's usually a couple of sentences of intro to each question. So of course your time won't start until after I've actually asked the question. Okay, thank you. So Mr. Smith, this first question would start with you. 2.5 million children rely on Medicaid and Child Health Plus for healthcare coverage in New York State, and they account for 38% of all Medicaid enrollees. We know that insured children miss less school, do better in school, and are more likely to attend college, become healthier adults, earn higher wages, and pay more in taxes. With the state facing a deepening fiscal deficit, what steps will you take to protect and enhance children's access to care, particularly through the Medicaid and CHIP programs? And again, as agreed, the answers are 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, first thing I would do is move swiftly to safely reopen our economy. I think a strong economy is going to be vital towards healthcare because primarily people receive their health insurance through their employment. As far as Medicaid goes, Comptroller DiNapoli just this year alone has identified almost $1.5 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse within the system. I would encourage him to continue doing so and support whatever measures he needs to undertake to eliminate that waste and fraud and to apply it to programs that are successful, to expand the program as much as possible. The expansion of business would get people onto their parents of these children onto employment roles to ensure that they are covered by employer health care.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gorin?
Yes, well, we are absolutely in a crisis because of COVID. And when we adopted the state budget on April 2nd, we made the decision to adopt a budget optimistic that we would get money from Washington, which we didn't get, but I'm hoping we still will, and we're going to continue to push for that. But I think it was important that we adopted it that way, because if we started out right away making cuts perhaps up to 20% in the Medicaid program and Child Health Plus and across the board, it would have been devastating for our families and for our children as well. So all we have to do now is avoid those cuts. Hopefully, we will see a change in Washington, and then we will be able to get some funding. But if we don't, we are going to have to make some very serious decisions moving forward, in addition to looking for revenues and trying to figure out a way we can make sure that we're making not only Medicaid whole, but Child Health Plus and Health Plus, and also see what we can do moving forward as our economy opens up and as we have more funding. But I am very concerned about this issue, and it is something that we really need to make sure that at all levels of government we're working together. Don't forget, as you know, the counties, both Suffolk and Nassau County, also contribute towards Medicaid, and they are having a hard time because they're not getting sales tax revenues like we're not receiving sales tax revenues. And of course, our income tax is off. So we've got to make sure that we're avoiding these cuts. That's my number one concern.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Gorin, the second question starts with you. Medicaid currently covers health care for postpartum mothers for 2 months. Data show that a longer duration of postpartum care would improve racial disparities in maternal mortality, reduce preterm birth in subsequent pregnancies, improve maternal mental health, and imprint infant well-care compliance and vaccination status. Would you support automatic Medicaid coverage to eligible postpartum mothers for 1 year? Why or why not?
Well, actually, I am co-sponsoring legislation right now that would expand eligible coverage for mothers up to 1 year, both requiring that health insurance premiums would cover it, and also to expand Medicaid coverage for that as well. So I think that is, absolutely necessary, and it's something that I'm going to really push if to pass if I have the opportunity to go back to the Senate next year.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, same question.
Yeah, I would support it, but first and foremost, the question would be funding, because right now everything is being prioritized. So, like I said in my prior answer, the first question of funding would be to find the money in the budget to make sure it happens. Again, getting back to where that comes from, all of the funding is driven by tax revenue, and that tax revenue is driven by the economy. It's going to be an ongoing theme. I think you're going to hear it from, well, I won't speak from Senator Gorin, but for me tonight, reopening the economy safely is going to be a driving force behind most aspects of our economy, most aspects of the budget. And when it comes to programs specific to healthcare, I would follow the science, follow the recommendations of scientists. I don't pretend to be. I am not a doctor, and I don't pretend to be. So I would follow the science and the recommendation of people who have the expertise in the field as to what programs are best suited for patients.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Smith, the third question goes to you first. Last year, the flu virus claimed the lives of 120 children nationally and 8 children here in New York State. These deaths are almost universally preventable with the flu vaccine. We know that children under 5 years old are at a much greater risk of getting seriously sick from the flu than older children, and they also spread it to their households. For this reason, New York City, New Jersey, and Connecticut have all implemented laws requiring flu vaccine for children attending New York State certified daycare facilities. Do you believe New York State should pass a law requiring flu vaccine for children attending New York State certified daycare facilities? Why or why not?
No, I don't. And I think, just to be clear, all my children are vaccinated. I just recently got my own flu shot. I'm vaccinated. I don't have, I'm sure this is going to be a question that comes up later, but concerning vaccines. But the mandatory vaccine requirements, I think they're for the flu are draconian. I think that people should have the option, and if they have a medical reason or a religious reason, they should be that should be recognized and honored.
Mr. Gorin?
I do support it with the caveat that I do believe there needs to be the opportunity to prevent medical information for children where it would be medically harmful to them, but I do support it.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Gorin, this fourth question is yours. During last year's measles epidemic, New York State passed a landmark bill heavily supported and advocated for by pediatricians statewide, which removed religious exemptions from school vaccination rules. However, multiple bills have been introduced that would weaken the effectiveness of legislation, such as bills that would allow non-physicians to issue exemptions. How would you maintain our state's public health infrastructure with respect to vaccination?
Well, I oppose the legislation that you described. I did vote to end the so-called religious exemption, which, by the way, I don't believe there is actually a religion that is involved in this. It really is a philosophical exemption, and I understand it. And I've met with a lot of families who were not happy with me, with the vote that I took. But measles is something that we thought we eradicated. It's come back. We have vaccinations for the purpose of eradicating diseases and keeping us safe and making sure that our children are safe in school. So I believe it's important, particularly as we're going to be looking towards hopefully a safe COVID vaccine, that the law that we passed should not be repealed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith.
I think the measles vaccine, again, all my children are vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. And that it should be administered by medical professionals, and then any medical exemption should only be given through a medical doctor. As far as religious exemptions, I think they have to be recognized if they are genuinely held, and the fact that pointing out to a specific religion is not the test. It's a question of how the religious belief is held. That's what the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld in terms of conscientious objectors when it came to military service, and the same standard would apply. It's an extremely rare circumstance. However, it is recognized that if somebody has a deeply held religious belief, that the government cannot compel them to act in such a way that violates their deeply held religious beliefs. And I understand the concern that people will use this as a gateway, that they have a philosophical difference. But again, that's a question for if they're going to ask for a religious exemption, the burden of proof would be on them to demonstrate that they did have a strongly held, long held religious belief that they should be granted an exemption. It's a very rare circumstance, but it's something that should still be a viable circumstance for people.
Okay, thank you. And stay aboard. The next one is yours too. Medicaid provides a vital New York State safety net for children. Children who receive care in Medicaid programs must re-enroll in the program annually to verify eligibility. 95% of children eligible for Medicaid at birth remain eligible for Medicaid for the first 3 years of life. So the re-enrollment process is not cost-saving. Furthermore, the re-enrollment process creates delays in care. Young children, during times when important time-sensitive screening for conditions like autism and lead poisoning are completed. For these reasons, the acting Medicaid director has advocated for an automatic 3-year enrollment in Medicaid beginning from birth, a measure supported by the AAP and pediatricians across the state. Do you agree with this policy? Would you support it? If not, what ideas do you have to streamline Medicaid eligibility such that children do not miss care as they await re-enrollment?
Yeah, it sounds like a very reasonable program. I don't have any specific objection to it. It seems like, if the experts in the field say that enrolling a child from birth through age 3 is the most efficient way to administer the program, then I would defer to the experts in the field and say, do it that way. If there's aspects of the administration, and again, it doesn't seem like a medical aspect. This seems to be more of a bureaucracy issue. If there's a better way to do it, I'd be open to it, but I would want to hear it from people who actually work in the field and not outside consultants who are supposed experts in the field. But I would want to hear it from people who are actually working in the Medicaid system that would say that this way is better. Let's do it that way. I wouldn't want to see some supposed outside expert come in and come up with a better mousetrap. The idea of enrolling a child for the first 3 years, it on its face seems reasonable and probably the right way to do it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gorin?
Yes, I do support it. And, among other things, I think in addition to it being so critical for the children to make sure that they're not losing out on care, there's also a fiscal aspect to this as well, because in your first 3 years of life, if a child has health care, they can catch things, they can help, the medical professionals or doctors, pediatricians can help them to deal with well care or maybe some issues that they may have going forward in life that could be discovered early on. So in addition to letting these children live a healthier life, there actually is also a savings to the Medicaid system because if you could correct medical issues early on, it's going to avoid these young people having issues for the rest of their life, and it also will save money in the healthcare system.
Okay, thank you. So the next question moves on to climate change. Climate change is a threat to children's health and exacerbates health disparities. Children are disproportionately affected by the impact of worsening air and water quality, extreme weather events, food insecurity, changing patterns of infectious disease, longer and more severe allergy seasons, and mental health issues. Air pollution from burning fossil fuels causes and exacerbates chronic lung illness, can lead to premature births, and causes neurodevelopmental toxicity, including IQ loss, deficits in attention learning disabilities, and sleep disorders. What are your top 3 priorities to slow the pace of global warming and accelerate New York's transition to a clean energy economy that is necessary to ensure a healthy future for our children?
Well, the top 3 priorities are all, in my opinion, folded into what we've already done. And that is passage of the Climate and Community Protection Act, which is a blueprint that gets us off of fossil fuels with goals of 2030, 2040, and 2050 completely, including automobiles. It's already working because you are not seeing the investment in fossil fuel anymore in New York State, and you're now seeing investment in renewable energy. So the first thing we have to do is, number one, to make sure that bill is not repealed, because there are many people on the other side of the aisle, and and I don't, my opponent's position is on this, on the Republican side, who want to repeal that bill. You can't repeal it. The second thing we have to do is we have to fund it. And we have to make sure as we move forward, we're providing the necessary funding to make sure that we're implementing it. And the third thing is we're probably going to have to pass additional legislation to implement, especially as it relates to air emissions going forward.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. Yeah, the clean water, clean air aspect of this. Number one, on the water side, I would support infrastructure and stormwater runoff projects. I think, you know, I see that at the town level. I would want to see it implemented, you know, through state funding as well to increase projects that would support clean water in our harbors and waterways, including sewage treatment plants and expansion of them, and get away from cesspools wherever possible. As far as renewable energy, I would support wind farms. I think they are going to be a critical aspect of our power grid going forward. I proudly drive a hybrid car. I'm surprised by how much I enjoy it. It's even though I've left it running a few times because it's very quiet, I confess. But I'm also a big believer in mass transit. I watch buses go by every day in the town of Huntington that are empty. And I think that there has to be a much greater emphasis placed on mass transit to get cars off the road and put people onto buses. I was working on a program, I called it Cheeks in the Seats, to get people to ride buses. My idea was stop asking people to pay to get on the bus and have the bus pay people to get on. It's a little bit outside the box, but I thought of getting some kind of a debit card where when you get on the bus, you swipe it and the bus gives you $1. And I think something like that, it's a little bit outside the box. I got a lot of strange looks when I first started talking about it. I think Supervisor Lupinacci still thinks I'm out of my mind, but I think a program obviously would take some development, but it's that kind of idea will work.
Okay, thank you. The next question for you. Racism harms children's health, starting from before they are born. Even vicarious racism, witnessed through social media, conversations with friends or family, or media images, harms children's health. The impact of racism has been linked to birth disparities, as well as both mental and physical health problems in children and adolescents. Racism is a toxic stressor impacting multiple aspects of health, for example, physical, mental, and behavioral health throughout their lives. Do you consider racism a public health crisis? Systemic racism exists in several sectors that impact children, including housing, healthcare, education, and policing policies. What would you propose to address or combat racism at this time for Long Island?
Well, I think the answer lies in the question, and that is that systemic racism is something that has to be addressed head on. I don't think it limits only to health. It's something that affects all aspects of everybody's life, and I think combating racism in all facets of life is and society is critical, and that's it has to be a global, all-encompassing view of combating racism and stamping it out wherever we see it. Once that is addressed, all the downstream effects of racism, whether it be impact on health, on housing, on policing, all of these things, if we stamp out the cause of it, all of these things will improve downstream.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gorin.
Yes, absolutely. Systemic racism is a problem in all aspects of our society. And yes, it is a health crisis. And yes, children really we really need to help them, particularly today, when honestly you see things on television that is said by all sorts of people, including at the very top. And I don't even know how parents today explain some of these things coming from our leaders in terms of some of the comments that they are making. But I've been very active in fighting back against it. We got more legislation dealing with hate crimes. I wrote the bill that now takes away a real estate broker's or salesperson's license if they steer people to neighborhoods based on the color of their skin or their religion or something else, which I think is significant, because there are families that just have never been able to go to certain neighborhoods because of the racist policies of just some real estate brokers. not most. And of course, in the criminal justice area, there has been, quite a bit that we passed, and there's a lot more that we need to do. But it's not just legislation. We as leaders have to be very vocal at whatever level we are leading, to make it clear that there is no tolerance whatsoever for racism or any form of intolerance. We have to stamp it out. We have to call it out, even if it's people that we know.
Okay, thank you. The next question from the pediatricians. Inequitable policies affecting health of immigrant children and families extend beyond the border and impact all our communities. Policies that create barriers to accessing healthcare, nutrition, and housing assistance to this population have harmful effects on the health of immigrant children. Do you have proposals that would address the fact that while immigrants pay taxes, they cannot access services during the most difficult time for all Long Island families? Do you support a state fund to help undocumented Long Islanders get the services they need to stay housed, healthy, and able to work?
Yes, we have to support everybody, including our immigrant population. And that is something that I believe very strongly we have to. We also have to recognize that in many cases, folks are showing up in the hospital where they have severe issues, and we have an obligation as a state and as a society to pay for their health, their healthcare costs. So I think it has to be part of the solution moving forward, including working with Washington to have real immigration reform, because I think the policy that we have out of Washington is demonizing people, based on, their immigration status is just wrong. Putting young people in cages is just wrong. So we have to work together on a comprehensive policy to solve this moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm the child of two immigrants. Both my mother and father came to this country with nothing, and have had very happy lives here. I think that I'm very pro-immigrant, and I have naturally have a soft spot for them. So I'm a big proponent of immigration. I have a belief that once you're here, you should enjoy all of the benefits that America has to offer. If our federal government failed us or failed you at the border and you're here, that should make no difference on what benefits you receive by the state of New York. It's the immigration problem has been ongoing for decades, and it's easy to point fingers now and say using inflammatory language towards immigration today. But the fact is, the immigration issue at our borders has been going on for decades. It's been kicked around and politicized. And I think most reasonable people know that you could probably solve our immigration issues in a matter of hours if people would go into the discussion without baggage, political baggage, that is. It's not a complicated issue. It truly isn't. But the fact that somebody is here, undocumented here in New York State, should not preclude them from receiving the benefits of any other New Yorker. And I would not support anything that discriminates against immigrants. I wouldn't tolerate it.
Okay, thank you. Next one, Mr. Smith. 4,200 children in New York State experienced a parental death as a result of the COVID pandemic. One in 1,140 children in Suffolk County have lost a parent to COVID. And in Nassau County, the number is 1 in 790. In addition, nearly 50,000 children on Long Island are newly living in or near poverty because of job losses related to the pandemic. All this will have a profound effect on the physical and emotional health of these children, both in the long and short terms. Furthermore, Black and Hispanic children have been disproportionately burdened with these challenges. Support is needed for housing, food, health insurance, and remote learning. If elected, what concrete steps will you take to address the needs of children as the pandemic continues? As we someday exit this public health emergency and life returns to post-pandemic normal, how will you ensure children's needs are identified and met, especially in these under-resourced communities? It took longer to read that than you have to answer.
There's a lot to unpack in there. But let me just say that I think that, you know, the pandemic and the quarantine restrictions that were imposed early on were very real, very necessary. I think that part of your question was the emergency aspect. I think the emergency aspect of the pandemic has passed. It's still very real, but I think there's a far greater understanding now of what steps need to be taken and what kind of treatment is available for patients. And I think that's reflected that the mortality rate has dropped off tremendously. I think first and foremost, it's got to be a priority of the state to reopen and lift the quarantine restrictions safely. But going forward, all of those things that you just mentioned in the question, as far as providing services, they're not going to even start until we've reopened our economy. It's vital that we get back to work. And I don't know if I'm migrating into another question down the road, but getting our economy reopened safely is the first step, because all of the other things that we're talking about tonight are going to be secondary to that. If we're all still quarantined and businesses are shut, it's going to have a tremendous negative impact on so many other aspects of our lives. That's the first step to addressing all of those issues that you'd mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gorin.
You know, living in New York State, we live in the international capital of the world. So we got hit hard and fast, and there was no rule book moving forward. And I did support the steps that were taken by the state, by the governor, by Dr. Ducker, the health commissioner, and going through some very painful steps that made sure that we were all staying safe, trying to stay safe, and getting these numbers down. A lot of mistakes were made. We got to look back. If it happens again, we're going to, know what we have to do moving forward. But I would like to think that we're totally out of the woods, but we're starting to see an uptick. And so we have to follow the signs. I don't think politicians should be deciding what we open and when we reopen. It really should be decided by our health professionals, both at the state level and now at the county levels, to make sure that we continue to stay safe, particularly with our kids going in and out of school. One of the things that I'm very concerned about moving forward is with remote learning. We're starting to see that there are a lot of kids that just don't have access to internet. They don't have enough tablets. So one of the things I'm going to be pushing in the next budget is to make sure that we provide more internet capability and equipment to those school districts that need it for the young people that just don't have it.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Gorin, this number 10 is yours. Due to the possibility of the impending 20% cut in the New York State budget, what do you propose be done for education?
Well, again, as I think I answered in one of the other questions, we had to make the decision back on April 1st, technically it floated over to April 2nd when we adopted our budget. Were we going to impose cuts based on what we knew was going to be a lot of pain, or were we going to try to be hopeful? And we based our budget based on promises made by the United States Congress and by the Trump administration as well, that we would get money for state and federal, funding for state and local government, which we did not get. But I'm glad we didn't make those cuts across the board. And the governor has actually been deferring some cuts in most cases. Got to fight to get the federal money. We don't get the federal money, we're going to be looking at other avenues. First of all, I think we should be cutting more in other areas and not in education. We have to look at perhaps an early retirement system. We have to look at some revenue enhancements, including something I'm not a big fan of, but online sports betting, because hundreds of millions of dollars is from New York is going to New Jersey. Probably also looking at doing some borrowing at the state level, and in some cases, allowing perhaps school districts to use some of the money that the state would normally give them for capital programs on an emergency basis based on need to use for some operating expenses.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. Starting with schools, I think the education is one of the most important functions of government. It should be one of the last things that we look at cutting. I would support, well, ordinarily, let me start by saying, ordinarily, I'm a debt hawk. I make no bones about that. I think government debt is not a good thing. However, this pandemic that we're going through right now is something that economists refer to as a black swan event, which is something that came out of nowhere. Nobody really saw it coming or had a real plan for it. In a situation like this, we are in a very low interest rate environment. I think it would not be beyond the realm of going into debt to continue financing education. I think education is that important. I would keep that in serious consideration if it was necessary. But aside from that, I would also go back to something that I always say when it comes to municipal budgets and state budgets is everything has to earn its way into the budget. Everything. There are certain things that will take priority because that's what crafting a budget's all about, is prioritizing, public safety, education, top priorities. But everything else has to, and including every line item should have to earn its way into the budget every year. And starting with that mentality when crafting a budget is the way we're going to get through this. But as far as cutting education, it would be, I would, as much as it pains me to say it, I would rather see us take on more debt to finance schools than to cut education.
Thank you.
Can I use one of my
yes,
I use one of my rebuttals?
Absolutely.
I think this is an important issue. I understand the concept of everything has to earn its way in the budget, but as it relates to school funding, I do not support that at all. One of the premises that we have that protects Long Island is to make sure that your school aid that you receive 1 year is never going to be cut at all for the following year. And my concern is that if we look at school aid, which is the biggest piece of the budget that we pass, and we say we're going to start from scratch, we're going to look at every school district. We're going to make you try to qualify for the fundings. Our school districts are all struggling to get money. Our taxpayers are paying so much in property taxes. I think it would be a big mistake to go down that route, because I think if we go down that route, you are going to see cuts across the board in many of the school districts that I represent, and I don't support that at all.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next question will start with Mr. Smith. How would you propose to improve on equity in education and access to education among the differing communities with varying degrees of income on Long Island? That's Mr. Smith.
Well, to begin with, right now everybody has access to a public school education. I don't think there's any question about that. The question is the quality of the education at each individual school district. If there's a struggling school district, I think we need to get additional resources to that school district, but I don't think that we should be taking it from one school district to pay off another school district. I think there's other places in the budget that we can find the money, and if we can't, like I said before, if we are in such a dire straits budgetary and economically in the state of New York right now due to the COVID crisis, then if necessary, take on some debt to ensure that the schools are fully funded, and struggling schools have additional resources provided to them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gorin?
I believe over a gradual period of time, and maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12 years, and it's going to start when we get past the economic aspect of this COVID crisis. we need to increase the amount of funding that the state of New York, money it raises from income taxes and sales tax, gives to our local school districts, and reduce the amount on the property taxes, because that will help all school districts, many of those that are struggling, and it also will help the property taxpayers. Foundation aid is intended to try to help those who are in most need. But we also have to understand that when looking at these formulas, Long Island has issues as well that have to be recognized. One of which is our high cost of living. It costs a lot more to live on Long Island, to drive a car. Salaries need to be higher so you can own, so you can live in a home. That has to be, a part of what we look at. Also, cost base are significant on Long Island in many areas. So school buses, it's a huge expense for most of our school districts, and many other school districts, particularly in urban areas, don't have those additional costs. So I think we have to factor that as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Mr. Gorin, the next question is yours. Vaping, nicotine, and marijuana are a huge epidemic in our middle and high schools. What is your stance on vaping legislation and promoting awareness regarding these issues?
Well, I voted to ban flavored vaping. I'm supporting all laws that are cracking down on vaping. There's a whole bunch of them that we've passed or have in the pipeline, including banning advertisement, banning the sale near schools. Vaping is unfortunately the new cool thing for a lot of for a lot of young people. So we have to do all we can as a state, whether it is legislation or also in terms of education, similar to what was done with cigarettes. And it took our society a long, long time to make it today so that it's not cool to smoke cigarettes. Both of my parents smoked when when they were young, and my mom for much of her life, and she paid the healthcare consequences in the future. So vaping is the new thing that we've got to be very, very vigilant about. I know there are some who say, well, it helps people get off cigarettes and it's a transitional thing. I hear that, but my main concern is it's something that is attractive to young people. Bubblegum flavors, cool packaging. I think the state has to be very aggressive both in education and in legislative bans to fight this, what is an epidemic.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith?
I completely agree with the senator on this. I have 4 teenage children. I'm very concerned about vaping. I'm very concerned about the liquefied THC, I think it is, whatever, pot. I'm constantly vigilant about it. I would support anything to increase education to teenagers and children about the dangers of this. I think it's a true epidemic at our teenage level. And I know there's a huge demand among adults, and I don't condone it. I think they're nuts for starting it. But from a civil libertarian standpoint, I say, all right, well, if you're 25 and you want to vape, I would say go ahead and do it. I completely agree that putting these flavors, bubble gum, et cetera, that are marketed obviously to children is a terrible, terrible idea. But I don't think there's a lot of daylight between the senator and I on this particular issue.
Okay, thank you. The next question, Mr. Smith, how would you decrease some of the disparities in education for our schools that are in need of basic services like food distribution and access to technology?
Well, again, I'm at the risk of sounding repetitive. I think if we cannot find savings in the budget elsewhere to prioritize it towards school budgets, again, with the crisis that we're facing, if we had to go into debt to feed children at schools, I would absolutely do that. I wouldn't even hesitate. I think vital services that schools provide to children outside of the core education, such as providing meals, is something that should absolutely be a priority.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gorin?
Well, you know, we have the free and reduced lunch program. It needs to be expanded. Many school districts are now waiving the requirements of having to have the parents qualify their students, and I think that should be done across the board, because unfortunately many of folks in our immigrant population are afraid to even fill out the forms. And one of the crises we have right now is when we have had the remote learning or the hybrids, trying to make sure that we continue to get the meals to those children in those school districts. And I got to tell you, the food pantries, Long Island Cares, Island Harvest, our school districts have been just working so great, and many other volunteers to making sure that happened. And we're going to have to continue to do that as we move through the pandemic. We're going to have to, I believe the state education department is going to have to make an assessment of every school district and almost do a census of what the needs are for each family in terms of making sure, first of all, they have internet service, because not everybody has service. And secondly, that they have the equipment, the tablets, so that their children, not only to deal with the remote learning, but also moving forward, because so much work is now online, so much work is done as homework when kids go home, and the young people that don't have access to this technology are left behind.
Okay, thank you.
And so it's going to be a question of providing some funding and help.
Yeah. All right, for you, Mr. Gorin. Multiple media sources, including Newsday, have reported a sharp increase in gun violence across New York City and Long Island during the COVID pandemic. What factor or factors do you believe are the most responsible for this increase? And what single action, legislative or otherwise, could you take as our district senator to significantly reduce gun violence?
Right. Well, you're right. It's a big problem in the city, on the island. In fact, Nassau County has been designated as the lowest crime rate in recent years. But in the city, it's been the problem. And I believe it has had a lot to do with mental health is on the rise. I think that is an issue that we need to provide a lot more funding as it relates to mental health, and to really help folks that shouldn't have a gun. Thank God we passed the red flag law, so the gun can be taken away from somebody if they don't have the mental capacity to have a gun. We also need to really crack down at Washington. We've got to really fight to get them to pass the same sensible laws that we've passed in New York, because you can bring guns in from any other state, and that is what is happening now. And now, unfortunately, we have these, militias that are sort of flourishing, and coming into our state and other states, bringing so many different weapons, and it's a real problem.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith.
First and foremost, I think anybody that wants to purchase a gun has to go through an extensive background check. I think the key to safe gun ownership is a thorough background check with mental health evaluations. As far as transporting firearms into the state of New York, that cannot happen legally unless it's transported through a federal firearms license holder. So any guns that are coming in from out of state that happens illegally. But if somebody is arrested for it, and this may be migrating into another topic, but right now with the bail reform law, if they're arrested for this, they're going to be charged and released immediately. So while it's effectively decriminalized a lot of gun legislation that might have been effective at a deterrent, but now somebody who's charged with many of these gun crimes they're going to be immediately charged and immediately released, because the judge doesn't have discretion to hold them.
Okay, and this one also for you, Mr. Smith. Right, yep. Pediatricians believe that gun violence is a public health crisis. Pediatricians regularly treat children injured or killed by firearms, toddlers who find loaded guns in the home, children who experience gun violence in their communities or at school, and adolescents who attempt suicide. Suicide, homicide, and unintentional shootings all injure and kill children at alarming rates. What do you think New York State can do from a public health perspective to address gun violence? So obviously, both of you spoke a little bit on this subject, but I'd like you to go a little further on that. Mr. Smith?
Okay, well, number one, the owner of the gun has to be responsible for that gun. If it's a parent or if it's somebody in the household, they have to be absolutely held responsible for the safekeeping of that firearm, whether it be through trigger locks or in a safe and storing ammunition separately from weapons. They absolutely have to be held accountable for the firearm. I'm a former Marine. I will tell you, I'm very comfortable around firearms. They don't intimidate me, but I also respect them tremendously because I know exactly what they are capable of doing. And firearm safety is something that must be taken extremely seriously. As far as children finding unattended, for lack of a better, unattended and unlocked guns in the house is absolutely unforgivable and totally preventable. As far as suicide from a firearm, it's a far more complex issue because the question arises: if the gun wasn't available, would the suicide attempt have ever taken place? It's a debatable issue, but an unattended firearm, a child who gets their hands on a gun, it is absolutely unforgivable, and the parent or the owner of that gun absolutely must be held to account for it.
Okay. Mr. Goring?
Oh, I absolutely agree, Ed. And that's why I'm very proud to have co-sponsored legislation that now requires that if you have a child in the house, you have to safely lock your gun and your ammunition has to be stored in a safe place. And one of the first things we have to do is make sure that we're not repealing the SAFE Act, which was an important law that was passed actually before I took office, and about 10 different bills, including the red flag law that was adopted and signed into the law since I became a state senator, and I was very proud of that. One of those pieces of legislation is now requiring that the New York State Health Department study the health impact of gun violence. Believe it or not, for years and years and years, the Senate, when it was controlled by Republicans, and it's got nothing to do with you, Ed, but when it was controlled by the Republican Party, refused to even allow that bill and some of the other bills to the floor for a vote. I'm very proud that we were able to do it, and now I want to make sure that we're following what the health department is doing. We're looking at their recommendations, and then we're implementing moving forward anything we need to do legislatively.
Okay, actually, you've anticipated one of the pediatrician's questions. We have several that follow up on gun violence. So if you want to add anything to this, what you've just said, and Mr. Smith would answer as well, would you support New York State establishing and funding its own gun violence research center? Why or why not?
Absolutely, that would be an expansion of the health department, and I think we could do that through our wonderful state university system. Okay. Expansion of the health department reviews and bring in our state university system. I think having that would be wonderful.
Mr. Smith?
If you could repeat the question, and before we answer, my cell phone, my camera just froze for about 10 seconds. I'm starting to get nervous that I'm having a technical problem. If somebody could email me a phone number in case I have to call in, but now everything seems fine right now. But I just missed the question because it was totally frozen.
Yeah, no problem. Questions don't count in your time, so that's fine. No, we were following up on some of the comments that Mr. Gorin had made to the last question. And the pediatricians did have a follow-up, which said, do you support New York State establishing and funding its own gun violence research center? Why or why not?
Absolutely. I think anything that would serve to diminish or prevent gun violence is a good thing and a necessary thing. I don't think anybody is going to say, no, we shouldn't look into the root causes of gun violence and try to eradicate it. But the simple answer is yes, I would support that.
Okay, thank you. Also for you, although many favor an assault weapons ban, most murder in the US are committed using handguns. Do you have a plan to address the handgun violence that occurs daily?
Yes, it would be, again, extensive background checks and including a mental health background check. As far as guns go, I don't get hung up on the cosmetic aspect of guns. I know that that's might be a controversial thing to say, but again, I do have some background in it, and I understand that there's, while there are cosmetic differences to rifles in particular, there's very little substantive difference downrange between a lever action rifle that John Wayne would be swinging versus a quote unquote assault rifle. And anybody that has minimal amount of training with a bolt action rifle will send very accurate rounds downrange very quickly. And it's not a question of, the cosmetic aspects of the rifle. As far as pistols go, I think that there can be a very broad background check required for them without violating the Second Amendment, frankly.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, where are we? Mr. Gorin.
Well, again, in New York, I believe we passed such significant legislation to protect us from unnecessary gun violence. And there is more that we will be looking at and need to deal with. But particularly as it relates to the issue of handguns, again, we've got to get Washington has got to act because anybody can bring a gun in, from any other part of the country over one of our bridges or tunnels. And yes, Mrs. Smith pointed out that is illegal. People do it all the time. And so we have to, really fight to make sure that Washington gives us the protection that we need and passes sensible laws as it relates to gun violence. In some cases, the ban on assault rifles, and also really, cracking down on the use of handguns. The gun show loophole and the person-to-person, friend-to-friend sale is one of the biggest issues that we've got to deal with it. And again, can't do it in New York, but you can do it in another part of the country and just bring the gun in.
If I could chime in,
yes.
I'll use one of my rebuttals, but it's not really a rebuttal. It's just an observation, really, and that is when it comes to sensible gun laws, and I mentioned it about the cosmetic aspects of it. I can't stress enough how important it is that people who are involved in drafting these laws look at the mechanical aspects of weapons and not just the cosmetic side of it. And the reason why is because these laws, they lose credibility when, for example, a pistol grip is used as a reason to create a law banning something. That is a cosmetic feature on a rifle that has absolutely nothing to do with the mechanical operation of the rifle itself. And it's things like that, when they're added into laws, cause people to lose faith in the law itself, and they mock it, and it loses credibility. So just as an observation crafting these laws, I would stress let's look at the actual use and mechanical operation of weapons and how they function, and if they have to be regulated that way, look at that and not the cosmetic aspects of it.
Okay, thank you. And the next question starts with you also. Yes. No, Mr. Gorin, sorry. What measures would you take to ensure that the schools of New York are properly equipped to protect students from violence and impending threats of violence?
Well, one of the first things I did when I was elected to the state senate was I went and met with all the school superintendents across the board in my district, and one of the big issues that they had was they had to take money that they were going to use for other programs, whether it was to buy equipment or to rebuild a certain classroom space, to harden the school to protect us from the possibility of senseless gun violence coming in. And so I have worked with many of the school districts to help them provide some of this funding. And also pre-COVID, I was working on legislation that was going to actually provide a direct revenue stream, a separate capital fund revenue stream for school districts to do that. Hopefully we can get back to that once we get out of this immediate crisis. I think we just really need to make sure that we're doing everything to protect our schools. Some of that involves also cameras on schools. I've been able to provide some funding for a lot of that, and we just have to assess every school what they need, and then to provide them with the financial assistance to do it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith.
Well, I think the first thing is the enhanced security at the school. I would not support arming people at the school as a preventative measure. I don't think that that's the answer. I've heard that debated in the past. However, I do think that additional security guards, additional eyes on the ground, additional training for teachers to keep an eye out for anything suspicious is one aspect of it. I think technology can go a long way in this, in terms of cameras, as Senator Gorin mentioned, and also direct line to local police departments, and having plans and drills in place for active shooters at every school, ready to go, and have them practiced. And it's I hope one day we look back on active shooter drills the same way today we look at air raid drills that I can remember doing in grade school. That it's thankfully a thing of the past, and I hope one day that look back at active shooter drills the same way. But right now it's a real thing, and I think having plans in place and have them practiced at the schools are one aspect of it. And then most importantly, as we've been saying for the last 10-15 minutes, is restricting access to guns to people that should never have their hands on one, particularly children and teenagers.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a question that's not on my list of questions, which we got a really good assortment of issues from the pediatrician questions. But for both of you, and this one, Mr. Smith, you would take first. In each of your cases, you win the election. You end up being in the New York State Senate for the next 20 years. Okay, no term limits, you're there, okay? You end up with the ability to drive things. How will life be different for your own grandchild in 20 years, for the grandchild of an undocumented immigrant who happens to live in Huntington somewhere, for the grandchild of a Black resident who is here, of course, legally is the example I'm giving, but has been suffering racism? How is life going to be different because of what you have the ability to do as a state senate? What's your wish list that you want your legacy to be for children?
Me first?
Yeah, you first.
Okay. Well, to begin with, I would say fast forwarding 20 years, looking into the crystal ball, I would say to begin with the categories of people that you just outlined, I would like to say they don't exist. There is no distinction between somebody who is undocumented or somebody who's a minority versus somebody who isn't. That's number one. Number two, it is. Hopefully it would be fiction, because I'm a strong believer in term limits for all politicians, dog catcher to governor. I think we absolutely need to enact term limits. My preference would be for 12 years. I've heard, I've had this debate with other people saying, make it, longer than whatever it is. I would start with term limits, number one. And that would be something I would want to see implemented in New York State, just because, as necessary as it is to keep people with experience in government, I think it's also necessary to bring new people in with fresh ideas. And if there are people that have been in government for so long that they're indispensable, let them take a couple of years off and let the voters tell them how indispensable they are by voting them back into office. But that's it. But I would say that I would love to see no distinction between the categories that that would be a fundamental goal, where it's not something that we see any distinction between race or whether they're undocumented or otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gorin, same question.
Okay, well, I can absolutely assure you that I will not be serving 20 years in the New York State Senate. And I love the Senate, and I love the institution, and I love what I've been able to accomplish. But I actually do support term limits. It's something reasonable. In fact, after I served, 3-year terms in the Suffolk County Legislature, I ran for another office, supervisor. I didn't win because I kind of felt that, I had accomplished a lot, but I think it was time for somebody else to, try to bring in some fresh new ideas. But I hope, to serve a number of years in the Senate and contribute. I would hope that, first of all, we have clean air, clean water, that we solve our drinking water problem on Long Island, so that our my future grandchildren and their children will continue to have a sole source aquifer that protects them, that we can clean up our sound and our harbors and beaches so that they can even be more accessible for recreational activities, bringing back a fishing industry, which used to be vibrant here. And in terms of, bringing us all together, I just hope we don't have any more racism. We don't have any more intolerance. And I hope we have leaders, unlike, the President of the United States right now, who makes it his governing policy to try to divide us up. I think our young people who are, getting involved in politics are really a lot different than many of the people of my generation. They're all working together on a common goal, and it doesn't matter where you were born or what you look like or where you came from. They just want to succeed.
Okay, thank you. Now, our instructions that you agreed to said that you have a 1-minute closing statement. I would offer you, I'll double that. If both of you would also revisit anything you want, I want to give you time, because again, this whole debate is about children as well. So you've all prepared, I'm sure, your 1-minute concise, pitch, but take a little more time if you want to knit together some more things that we've talked about here tonight about children and health. And Mr. Gorin, you're on.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered a lot of topics here, and so I think I just really want to end by saying I just want to thank the League, and I don't see Eve anymore on the screen, but the American Academy of Pediatricians and our 5 Towns College people. This is the second one of these we have done. Thank you for everything, and Ed, thank you for the very important civic engagement. I think the best thing we can do for our children moving forward is to try to bring some civility to our politics. we have extremes on both ends of the political spectrum now who are really making the loudest noise. And in some cases, they're drowning out the more important and powerful voices. And so I think we have to avoid that. We have to tone that down. We got to find people that are going to come together and in the middle to try to help us solve a lot of our problems. And that's something I've done my whole career. I've done it as a legislator in the county, at the town level. I've done it as much as I can in the Senate. The Senate is a much more partisan world than it should be, and I'm going to continue to fight to try to end that. But I think for our children's sake, we need more bipartisanship and more civility moving forward. And I think we will have a better state and a better world. And I would humbly ask you for your support when you vote, whether it's election day or early voting or by mail.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gorin. Mr. Smith.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank the American Academy of Pediatrics and also the League of Women Voters and 5 town colleges as well. They've done an excellent job despite my technological handicaps getting this done. But I would like to see, going forward in New York, I would like to see a sustainable tax policy, a sustainable economic policy, sustainable criminal justice policy. These are the things that, that have to be focused on in New York. We cannot keep seeing these extremes one way or the other in terms of policy. We have to stem the tide of people leaving the state for more economically progressive areas of the country. It's going to have a snowball effect if we don't stem that now. And the way to do that is by creating jobs here in New York, by having favorable economic policies that are very bluntly pro-capitalist. I'm an unapologetic free market capitalist, and I would do whatever I could to attract new businesses, new industries to Long Island, to New York State in general. That is the underpinning of all of the topics that we discussed today, is when we both always came back to funding. The role of the state government is to, the rich aunt or the rich uncle is Albany, that writes the check to the local communities. And that's the role. And we have to create policies that are going to attract big business, that's going to flow down to smaller industries in New York. I would also say, term limits, I'm a big believer in them. And I would also ask that you give me your consideration and your vote this November. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, thank you, Mr. Gorin. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Huntington, 5 Towns College, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Stephanie Quarles, our timer, and myself, I thought we had a good give and take.
Yes.
There were a lot of
Stephanie.
And we wish you both well. And as I think you both said, people need to know early voting starts this coming Saturday. The times vary. You can vote at any of them. Absentee ballots, once completed and double sealed in envelopes, can in fact be dropped off at any open polling place on election day, any open early voting site, and at the Board of Elections in Yaphank. And you can always try to call the Board of Elections or call the League of Women Voters with questions. And again, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Lanigan, a student here at 5 Towns College, and for the 3rd year in a row, 5 Towns is hosting the League of Women Voters Meet the Candidates Night, only this time it's virtual. Joining me now is David Cohen, the president of 5 Towns College. And Mr. Cohen, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And how different will this event be this year now that it's virtual?
Well, obviously, it'll be very different. In the past, we've done it. We've had audiences there. Sometimes the audiences are a little partisan, and so we have sometimes a little raucous crowd. But this year, there won't be an audience, so it will be different. But it will still be important because they'll still be talking about the important issues of the day.
Have you gotten feedback in the past from candidates in terms of the events put here at Five Towns in the last few years in terms of Meet the Candidates? Have they given you feedback about that?
They have, and I have to tell you, it's always routinely positive. Before the college got involved, these were very minor events, or they weren't treated that seriously, and they might have been done at small venues like libraries with very small turnout. But when the college got involved and the students got involved, we were able to have a much broader reach in terms of the voters. And so I think that by elevating the importance of the event, it certainly led to a more informed electorate. And I think that the candidates appreciate the opportunity to meet voters and to share their views on where they stand on the important issues of the day.
For Five Towns College, why are events like this important?
Well, for a number of reasons. Obviously, they bring attention to the college and the good work that we do. And that's important because we want employers to be thinking about Five Towns College students when they're hiring. So I think that that is very important. But the other thing is that it gives students who are emerging journalists and broadcasters an opportunity to get involved in significant events, the type of events that they would be involved in post-graduation. So I think it's important for mass communication students to get involved in these events and to make sure that they end on their resume so they can talk about the things that they're doing. And in this day and age, we're in a very competitive workplace and a work market. I think having these type of events on your professional resume is important. So these events are important for a variety of reasons. Again, they bring attention to the college and the students who go here. They provide important work experience. And then, of course, the last piece is that it exposes students to the issues. One of the things that students told us in prior years when we would survey them was they wish the college would bring more of the bigger issues of the day to campus so that they can be exposed to them and learn about them. And certainly bringing politicians from both sides of the aisle to the campus to talk about their perspectives on the important decisions that affect not just the students but the world, I think is exactly what we should be doing. And we should do more of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen. Stay tuned for the candidates, everybody. That's it for now. I'm Sean Lanigan reporting.